All right. For this week's video that I definitely didn't forget about, we will be discussing chapters 5 through 9 for Legal Argument by James Gardner. Basically, this chapter explains how lawyers build persuasive arguments by carefully reading the authority of the law surrounding them, forming their major and minor premises, reasoning through facts and the law, and anticipating potential counter-arguments, right? So let's start with chapter 5, right? Chapter 5 focuses on basically building the arguments themselves, right? Gardner explains that lawyers do not read cases or statutes passively. Instead, they should read with a purpose, looking for rules or reasonings or any sort of authorities that can later support an argument. It emphasizes a more active style or, active reading, right? Such as questioning, first impressions, paying attention to any context, and then basically always challenging what we think the authority is saying itself, right? Basically, this chapter shows us that legal reasoning, or legal reading, not reasoning, is different from normal reading because every detail can become important when building an argument. And when applying this case to the fact patterns we worked on in class, I realized that it is not enough to simply quote a case or a statute, but to fully understand how the authority works around said statute when it applies to the facts you are trying to analyze, right? Bit of a mouthful, but those are my notes on it. So, chapter 6, right? This is all about the major premise, right? Legal rule, standard controlling the outcome of the case. He explains that legal reasoning depends heavily on whether the authority being used is binding or basically just persuasive, right? And kind of where the authority falls. A lawyer must always establish why a rule is authoritative before applying it to the facts. And the only other thing I have is a lawyer defines the rule, completely shape direction of an argument. If the major premise is weak, unclear, or unsupported, the rest of the argument becomes difficult to defend, which leads us to chapter 7. That makes sense why I wrote it that way. The minor premise, right, which connects the facts of the case to the legal rule itself. Basically, Gardner explains in this chapter that because that facts only become persuasive when they are supported by evidence, such as testimony or documents, right? Complex situations should be broken down into smaller proof facts that are easier to understand, basically like your syllogistic kind of format, right? The chapter also is about the importance of defining legal terms, clearly avoiding conclusory arguments. Obviously, don't jump straight to conclusions as a lawyer. You want to actually, fully flush out every argument you have. And that's basically it for chapter 7, just the minor premise, right? How it connects with the major premise, how it connects to your legal argument in general. Chapter 8 is all about reasoning and inference on explaining how lawyers move from the major and minor premises to the overall conclusion, right? The third part. Basically, just putting the pieces together in order to, in a clear order for it to make sense. Step-by-step reasoning. Don't skip steps. Don't be unsupportive of your reasoning. Obviously, it can weaken your credibility. Use different analogies or comparisons to explain why something is, to make it more persuasive. Just overall, just connecting your argument and making it, actually complete. And then that just leads us to chapter 9, which is just talking about counter arguments, right? Basically, strong lawyers do not ignore weaknesses in their cases. It's more of kind of to anticipate said weakness. So you want to identify possible objections from the other side and be ready to respond to them using direct facts, right, and logic. This chapter emphasizes counter arguments are not just defensive but strategic. Yep, just said that. Addressing opposing points first, yada yada yada. It's basically just showing the importance of persuasive legal reasoning, basically in the courtroom setting, requiring both sides to be understood, to be a good lawyer. Don't ignore anything, understand and ingest everything, and be prepared. It's basically what chapter 9 says. So, overall, this is just kind of how lawyers are actively reading and kind of understanding how things can be written in persuasive manners or be approached in the ultimate goal of being persuasive in a court of law. So, major premise, minor presence, conclusion, pulling everything together, and potential counter arguments. Together, they demonstrate that legal arguments are not about immediately finding the right answer, but instead about constructing a logical, supported argument that convinces the judge and jury. That's it.